Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Fritton here with Havoc Shield. We're taking some time to introduce the astonishing members of our new advisory board. We've been very, very serious about ensuring our products are designed with and by the best in the business, and by those who have been in the job of defending companies, small and large. And for that reason, we assembled a group of professionals we trust to help us build the best cybersecurity program we can for the millions of startups and small businesses out there that need our help. The reality of cyber threats today is that small companies are attacked just as often as large ones are, but they don't often have the time or resources to defend themselves or benefit from the competitive advantages of a solid security stance. So the advisory board here is designed to bring those resources to our customers through our company. You'll be hearing a lot more from our members throughout the year, but today I have the pleasure of introducing advisory board member Ben Meader. I met Ben while going to school here in Chicago, and Ben and I have always, I think, been interested in what each other are doing, as we both worked in different startups, and we rekindled our relationship after meeting at DEF CON a few years back. He's taught me tons about the inside of the industry, and I think enjoys the fun and technological advancements of the security space as much as I do. And it's nice to go to Vegas with him every once in a while. Ben, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So I know a little bit about your background, but for folks watching, can you give us a little bit of your past experience? What drove you through your professional journey?
Yeah, so I've been interested in computers from way back. So I remember back in the day, I was probably 6 years old. My parents got me a VIC-20. So if that tells you anything about my experience with computers, the interesting thing about that is I had the computer and it sat on a desk for exactly 1 year because it didn't interface with our TV, and Santa Claus had to bring
Oh
uh,
man.
a monitor the following year. And I think all that did was spur my interest even more. And so, fast forward a little bit, I really got interested in computers probably about the time I got my first modem. So, nice 1200 baud modem, started getting interested in BBSs, ran my own BBS for a little while. Um, really was interested in security as well at that time. College came and went. Then I had an opportunity with Hewitt Associates, which no longer exists, that is out in Lincolnshire. I think now they're called the Light Systems. We had a really, really good security team there, professionals that blew me out of the water at that time. So it was more like a trial by fire, and I got to learn on some open source Squid proxies, do some Blue Coat web proxies, got really into network security, supporting firewalls for a large, international company.
Yeah.
Um, Stayed there for about 8 years, and then moved on to Arthur J. Gallagher in the Itasca, Illinois area, and I was the only security resource there for about 12,000 employees. Yeah,
Really?
so that was interesting, and I learned a lot about how kind of the business perceives security when you're the only one kind of fighting the fires. Now I did report to our CISO, but it was only 10% of his job. So if that gives you any kind of clue about at the time how much they put into security, it wasn't much, and it was rather daunting and challenging. Um, Also at that time I was going. That's when I actually started going after my MBA down at DePaul
Mhm.
in entrepreneurship and marketing. Um, and so I kind of got the idea of some of the small business challenges when I was starting to go through a couple of my classes down at DePaul. In fact, the business plan I wrote for one of the classes I was in focused on IT consulting for doctors, entrepreneurs, accountants, and lawyers. I called it the deal plan. But it was all about really supporting that underserved market. My mom actually worked for a law firm back in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and so I had a pretty good idea of how fluent lawyers and their staff were in computers, and it wasn't much, if that tells you anything. So Yeah, that's that was kind of the start. And then I'd say about 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to get more into the business side. So, and it also coincided with moving back to my home state of Iowa. So I've worked for in Iowa, Aviva, which also no longer exists in Iowa. It's an international insurance company. And when I worked there, I started picking up the risk management side of security. So, assessing vendors that we did business with, assessing solutions from a consulting standpoint that we were installing, and working on the security operations team as well, kind of split duty there.
Yeah.
And that's when I moved on to my last role before the one I have right now, working for a Fortune 250 financial services firm, leading the risk management area within information security, which was focused on things like vendor security, risk quantification. We did a lot of risk assessment work, really just to try to quantify the risks that the company was facing and whether or not we wanted to accept those risks or try to remediate them. But while I was working there, and we kind of reconnected at DEF CON, I knew there was a problem that I think Havoc Shield could solve, pretty quickly with the ideas that you were kind of talking about when it was pretty early on.
That was early.
It was very early, and I thought, there's a thing here, a nugget that I think it kind of lodged in my brain, while we were in Vegas, and one of those was the fact that all of these little insurance agents and brokers that we were doing business with, some of them were doing business, in the state of New York and some in California, where the regulations were really starting to hit, and we were having to demonstrate that these either captive agents or agents that we were doing business with had the appropriate security controls, like multi-factor authentication, as an example, to be compliant with those regulations. And so it involved sending out massive emails to well over 1,000 different small insurance agents and brokers, and asking them to fill out these surveys, which admittedly we're at the mercy of trusting what they're providing us. And so based on what you were telling me, I thought, well, and what you showed me not too long after that trip, you actually you turned things out so quickly. It blew me away. Based on what I saw, I'm like, we can validate, and we would be able to actually find out if they went through a security awareness program, if they installed a multi-factor authentication solution, password vault, all of those things. And I thought, there's definitely something here. And so the most recent company that I just started a couple months ago is a large domestic insurance company. I'm the director of information security there. My team's not only focused on governance, risk, and compliance, but also cybersecurity operations, engineering, and identity and access management. So each one of those has unique challenges, but I got a great group of leaders that I can rely on to help make things work. I was thinking about that. The pace of change is drastic these days. And I'd say in some ways that modernization has actually almost enabled security practices that are worse than they've ever been. And what I mean by that is, the consumer grade technology that each of us has on our phones these days, it's so enticing and so useful that it's really federated out the responsibility of security to everyone in a much bigger way. BYOD, for example, firms want to save money and employees already have the tech needed to do their work. The problem is, without some kind of central security mechanism or consistent security awareness and education on how to use that technology, you could be opening your company up to a breach or a big data loss at the very least. It's always the basic blocking and tackling, and we say it's basic.
Right.
You talk about implementing MFA, using a password manager, making sure AV is on, not enabling overly permissive permissions. All those make a big difference. And when you're insulated in a larger company and you work with security teams, you kind of take for granted that people know what you're talking about. But when you go to some of these smaller companies where they are just focused on delivering a product, doing the thing that they do best, this stuff gets complex to them. And so it's like, trying to, I won't say my mom is not tech savvy, but she's not that tech savvy. So it's, going in and teaching your mom in some
Yep.
cases how to do this stuff, and it requires time. If you've heard the story of, being the IT guy in your family, you're the one who gets called up and asked about, how do I do X, Y, or Z? Well, there's not always time to do that. And so that's where I think there's a big problem. That's where the disconnect between large and small is just in the resources that are available to those small companies just isn't the same as what the larger companies have.
Right. Yeah. Well, and as you said at the beginning, there, it's never has there been, and COVID only made it more true. More plethora of technology available. So your threat landscape has just broadened. Right.
Oh, yeah,
It's no
definitely.
longer behind the firewall. Right.
You don't even know what computers people are using to attach to these remote meetings, what they might have on there. In some cases, who knows how many of these places are doing host checks or anything to make sure that there's a proper AV in place. I mean, I don't know. There's a million things with the pandemic that we could get into. There's a lot of small businesses I like to spend money at, but from a consistent standpoint, I'm a big fan of my chiropractor. Uh,
Yep.
and so the funny thing here, so it's not my current chiropractor, but my old chiropractor, which I stopped going to, and that's a big story, and it actually isn't related to what I'm about to share here, but um, I'm almost positive they suffered a ransomware event. And I say that because when I first signed up with them, this was like 3-4 years ago, they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to do an X-ray, but our systems are down." And I said, "Oh, okay. When are they going to be back up?" And I could tell from the conversation that there was something really bad going on, and it took
Mhm.
them a good 2 weeks uh, to get back online. And so, I kind of extrapolate that a little bit, and I am not joking. I love my chiropractor, by the way, but those small doctors' offices, whether it's eye doctor, chiropractor, whatever, typically they've got a wireless network. They're kind of lodged into one of these small strip malls or whatever, and you go in there and you just turn on your phone and scan for Wi-Fi, and you're like, oh, I don't know how safe this is. Or then get left behind in the room when you're waiting for the doctor, and there's a computer with all the medical records just sitting there,
Online.
just begging for someone to stick a USB drive in. Those things scare me to death,
Yep.
and I'm like, ugh. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I'm absolutely on board with the mission. So, that conversation we had 3+ years ago, and having that target demographic in mind, um, I just didn't know what the right model for engagement might be, from a security perspective, especially. But the whole concept of, TurboTax for cybersecurity really resonated, and I thought, that's the tagline. You've got the right approach. I think, you know, and even now, that conversation 3 years ago, yeah, I was on board. It was a nugget in my brain. Um, but fast forward, and I'd say there's three things that make it even more relevant today. Which, number one, the ransomware problem isn't going anywhere. The cost of insurance is going through the roof due to that.
Yeah.
I think I was at it was Secure Iowa, and this was probably 3-4 months ago, where I saw a um, presentation on ransomware and the response, and just how much more prevalent it is. I think it was from 2019 to 2020, it had gone up 300% in terms of the ransoms that were being asked for. And so it's not only increasing in the amount of times that it's happening, but it's also increasing the amount that will be charged because companies are actually paying the ransoms because they really don't have a choice. The second thing was that big companies that want to do business with startups, and I've seen this firsthand, big companies want that lifeblood, that kind of injection of innovation. The problem is they always feel like it's the security staff in their company that is slowing them down. And we're really just saying, these companies typically can't even answer the questionnaire because they're going to answer no to just about everything. I mean, most of the questions that we're asking from a cybersecurity perspective, they don't have the funds or the wherewithal to have these things. So it's not just being able to answer the questions, but also in order to make it more efficient to be able to do business with these folks, a way of validating, which I know Havoc Shield provides, and that will be golden in the years to come. So I think that's something that is definitely a feather in the cap. And then finally, the third one is just regulations. If we talk about ransomware, it's only going to get more so, and the regulations that will come with it are going to force the hand of these companies. So, if you can get ahead of that and start, providing a solution that's easy to use and that people can get on board with, it won't just be the New Yorks and the Californias that you have to adhere to. It's going to be nationwide, federal. These things are just moving in that direction. So it's going to keep getting harder and harder to do business and stay profitable if you can't validate that you have a security program.
Right. Yeah, that's going to become just like having to file your taxes every year.
Yep.
Right. It's just something you got to do. And I think, yeah, that the small businesses who will win and the large businesses who will out innovate their competitors are going to be the folks that kind of find a way to pair their needs together, right? Like these larger companies need their small vendors. It's an intense threat vector for these large companies, is the third parties who they work with. If they can find a way to provide small businesses with the types of security, resources, attitude, understanding to meet their standards, instead of having to always seem like the gatekeeper, the bad guy, just saying, no, you got to have it. No, you got to have it. And then these small businesses can find a way to lead with that, to have that be a competitive advantage over other alternatives. And there are always alternatives. Then those are the folks that I think are going to win together. So
I got approached by an executive at the last company that I was at to work with a startup that ended up getting funding not too long ago. And their big concern, which was hilarious to me, but their big concern was, how do I answer these questionnaires? So I literally spent 2 hours with them on a phone call, Zoom like this, one night, just saying, yep, this is what a company's looking for when they ask for that. You want to try to match yourself to frameworks. You want to have a program that can exhibit, whether it's NIST cybersecurity framework or what have you, show that you're actually thinking about this and you have a response to some of these questions. And they were genuinely concerned about it. And these guys were, on the higher end of your computing abilities, very high end. And so it wasn't just a problem of your mom and pop shops necessarily. It's startups that have security expertise or IT expertise that maybe don't know how to answer even these same questions or exhibit the security maturity that they need to in order to get their foot in the door.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm going to ask you one last question. We always like to lead with, I think, some actionable help, in everything we do, whether you're a customer of ours or not. So if you have one, can you leave us with like a word of advice or a tip to help listeners better secure their organization?
I'd say, phishing is getting more sophisticated. Once your credentials are stolen, all bets are off. And so MFA is really that first kind of line of defense, a de facto line of defense that you probably need. Don't you reuse passwords either. Get a password manager so you don't you aren't doing that, because once one gets stolen, if you're using the same one, it's gonna happen in multiple places. So those would be the first two things, and maybe the last one would be back your stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
If something does happen, you're going to want to make sure you have a backup that is safe and secure.
Especially nowadays.
Yes.
Agreed. 1000%. 1000%. Ben, thank you so much for being part of the board, and thank you very much for doing this with us. Appreciate
Oh, it
it.
was my pleasure. Thank you very much, Brian.